So our topic today is on mitigating real estate sustainability related risks through commercial leases. There's actually elements you can put in your leases to make them more anticipating of sustainability needs that are emerging. I am Caroline Magee. I am at PropertyWorks. We're a software and services company that supports lease management and management of leased locations. And Marla Thalheimer is joining us as well, the Senior Director of Business Engagement at Institute for Market Transformation, with a lot of expertise in this kind of performance leasing. And our agenda today, we'll be talking high level about some market trends that we're seeing, look a bit at emerging and currently existing, already enacted, building performance standards in different regions in the United States, talk some about what is a high performance lease, and look at some actions we can take to mitigate risks that are not super expensive to get started. For logistics, if you have questions, just when they occur to you, pop them in the Q&A in the webinar, and we'll try to address as many as possible during the webinar and at the end. We definitely are wanting to hear from you and hear what's of interest to you around this topic. So for PropertyWorks, our company, just a little bit of background, we take pride in making commercial lease life a little bit easier. We have lease management software, and then we have people services to help with all the aspects of leasing, from accounts payable to licenses and permits to tracking development, equipment, those sorts of things at your unit locations. And we work with a number of sectors: retail, restaurant, auto care, personal care, whatever you can think of that has multi-unit lease locations. We work with those clients. I want to talk some about the trends that we're seeing in our work. ESG, there's all kinds of noise about this in the news, but we are still seeing a lot of interest, particularly around the E, the environmental, related to real estate. How do we consider environmental issues? How do we collect data? What can help reduce impact and also reduce costs at our location? Lots of discussion about this. Even with some of the pushback against ESG as an acronym, the interest in the underlying factors that make up ESG remains really strong. We're seeing regional law and policy trends continuing to emerge, building performance standards around the social aspect, environmental justice, and attention to how a piece of real estate performs in its region with the climate and also the social surroundings of that piece of real estate. GHG emissions continues to be a lot of interest. This is more than carbon. Sometimes there's some myopia around carbon, but there's other greenhouse gases to consider. Insurance availability, I'm sure many of you are watching this closely. There are states that are having more difficulty insuring properties because of what's going on in the physical environment in those states: California, Florida, Louisiana, for example, and then also policy carve-outs around natural disasters. So what we're interested in, lease language. How can lessors and lessees get ahead of trends, build them into their leases? When you're looking at a 15-year term, how do we think ahead a little bit and put that in the leases? Lease language related to that, which part of why we are collaborating with IMT to help us learn and get smart about this. Tracking relevant lease and lease location information. This is in PropertyWorks wheelhouse. How can we be helpful to our clients in this way? And water worries I threw in here at the bottom as another trend consideration, particularly over the last few months. We're seeing a lot more discussion of water availability in different regions. I'm thinking of the Southwest, but we know a number of areas are impacted by water availability as well. So as an overview, we are hoping that leases and lease commercial real estate can be a sustainability plus. It's a positive part of your overall brand sustainability picture. Our clients want to stay in business. They want to continue developing new locations and then growing in all of their locations and all of their regions, which is one way that we think about business sustainability. We continue to see regulatory, consumer, and investor preference. This is still emerging, but investors are always interested in risk factors, and particularly environment and sustainability is a present risk factor. And we're seeing physical trends, as we've discussed, that are impacting leased commercial real estate. Our sense is it's a narrow band of folks that have a lot of extra cash to throw at sustainability related solutions and data gathering. So we're very interested in low cost or no cost solutions, and we'll talk about some of those today. That's why we're here. What are meaningful and affordable steps we can take now, plan for the future to make leases and leased commercial real estate affordable and sustainable throughout these terms of lease. And that is the source, the genesis of this collaboration between PropertyWorks and IMT. We wanted to get smart about performance-based leasing, and IMT is already smart about performance-based leasing and leased real estate. So, Marla.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Hello, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here today. I'm Marla Thalheimer, the Senior Director of Business Engagement at IMT. In case some of you may not be familiar with IMT, so just to let you know a little bit about us, we're a national nonprofit. We're focused on driving demand for high-performance buildings. And we like to define high-performance buildings as those that are healthy, efficient, resilient, and equitable. We believe that buildings have the ability to positively transform people's physical, social, and economical well-being. So because of that, we work closely among all different kinds of industries. We work with the local government, national government. We work with the real estate industry in general. We work with local community organizations. All of this work we do, we really try to help drive demand through education, best practices, and also building performance policy. So that's a little bit about IMT. Why buildings? You know, why are we so focused on buildings? And, you know, there are many reasons why, you know, a lot of times just, you know, people don't connect the dots between the impacts that buildings actually have, both on the environment, but also on human health. We spend so many hours inside buildings, right? So according to the EPA, you've probably heard this statistic before. It's been around a while, but according to the EPA, we spend an average of 90% of our time indoors. So the buildings that you are in matter to your business, can affect your bottom line for reasons just beyond rental rates, right? You know, the productivity of your staff, the you know, maybe some lighting of how you display things, that kind of thing. I mean, really, that indoor environment makes a big difference on your bottom line of your business. So, I mean, at IMT, we actually believe that buildings can be a part of the solution to climate change and not just part of the problem. So that's why we love to educate, and that's why we're here today. I'm going to dig in a little bit to some of these trends and market drivers. You know, Caroline, you mentioned some of the ones that you're seeing directly. I mean, and we're seeing, you know, seeing the same. There's increasing climate-related disasters, right? We're all seeing more and more. There's always a wildfire or a, you know, a hurricane and it's not, and those things have always happened, right? We've always had weather, but we're just seeing it a higher frequency and a higher severity. And that's the point that, you know, it's something that we can't take lightly. You know, and because of that, rising cost of insurance. Oh my goodness, right? Like we could do a whole webinar just about rising cost of insurance. But it's also, you know, unpredictable energy cost. You know, it's fluctuating, so it's hard to know how to plan on energy costs. There's also another side of the market drivers. There's we're starting to get more and more demand from customers. Customers want to increasingly do business with responsible companies that they know are aligned with their core beliefs. Also investors, lots of investors pushing from their side of it as well. Lots of reporting requirements that our investors are asking to do and asking companies to do. There's also increasing ESG and climate disclosure requirements. And what we mean by that is like we've got some pending legislation from the SEC coming down the pike. We don't know what that looks like quite yet. Probably will be pulled back a little bit, but there'll be something coming from the SEC. Caroline and I were just talking a few minutes ago about California putting in some new legislation requiring companies based out of California to disclose emissions. So again, it continues to increase. And then, of course, there's some building performance policy that we're going to talk about in just a minute. So before we do that, I just wondered, Caroline, from your side, do these drivers make sense to you? Are you seeing a lot of these same things from your end?
Yes, yeah, definitely the same things. And we just keep investigating what are the low cost ways to address it. So when we talk more about solutions, I can talk a little about ways to partner with your utility. There may be incentive programs, take advantage of, and then just being mindful of the regional pressure with that. California, it looks like, is about to pass legislation requiring large companies to disclose greenhouse gas emissions, but throughout their value chain. And so if you're in a national brand and your brand is going to be operating in California, there's a likelihood that you'll be reporting, or the brand will be reporting, and real estate is necessarily part of that reporting picture. So how can we get ahead of that and share the cost between the landlords and the tenants?
Right, exactly. I want to dig in a little bit to building policy. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of this. It's one of the big market drivers, actually, and there's a growing list of cities, counties, states. They're committing to implement building performance standards across the US. So what this map is, it's a map that shows the current list of the National BPS Coalition, BPS for Building Performance Standards. So these are jurisdictions that have committed to launch a building policy by Earth Day 2024, which is a blank from now. So there's a lot here on this map. So just wanted, if you're not familiar with this, just wanted to make sure that you know that this is a thing. This is something that's happening. And maybe take a look. Some of you may just be concentrated in one area, and maybe you're not seeing anything in your area at the moment. But I will tell you that this list continues to change and grow all the time. You can keep track of this on the IMT website. This map is a really great. It's a great visual, but it's just a great way to sort of track, like, when something is potentially coming down the pike. If you have any sites in these areas, or maybe you're looking to open up a site in one of these areas, you just should know about this, so you're thinking ahead, right? Because I love how Caroline is very focused on solutions and making sure that we're thinking about it in a way that's best for your business. And that is all about, like, again, being more on the front side of it and being proactive versus reactive. So just knowing that there might be something in that area, you can dig in and sort of, determine whether or not there's something currently or there's something coming down the pike. But what ultimately the building owner is responsible, but I know a lot of your leases for especially if you're a triple net lease for any kind of a franchise, like you may take care of the building systems. So this is where there might be a little risk, right? So if you are the one responsible for the efficiency of the asset per your lease, you want to make sure that you're having conversations, maybe having, planning, having conversations with your landlord, because we want to make sure that you're not at a financial risk. Some of these jurisdictions that are implementing policy, if your building doesn't meet a certain standard, you do have a potential of a financial risk that could be a result of that, from either risk of non-compliance. So we don't want everybody to have some sort of be surprised by a large fine coming down the pike. I want you to be educated about it, that this is something, and then just kind of start thinking about things you can do to be, again, proactive versus reactive. I don't want
Marla, we have a question about
Yeah.
what about cities that are under preemption? Can they support building performance standards? Is this something you can speak to, or is this something we should come back on?
I'm not sure I'm clear on cities under preemption. Not sure what we mean by that exactly.
Is this, I think it's if the state is saying, you can correct me in the chat around, if the state is saying, no, we don't want performance standards, or we don't want certain types of regulation, but a city's going ahead and trying to manage this, or already had BPS in place. Do we know yet if kind of this, if cities are able to proceed with their standards, or is this still kind of snarled up?
Yes, thank you. I get that makes sense now. And the best answer now, I'm not on the policy team. Our policy team are the experts here. But from what I do know, I'm going to say it depends. So there is a lot of, there is some, litigation happening here and there, those kind of things. And the only thing I would say is, like, yes, something like may fall through there. There is, like, when you look at Colorado, there's several cities in Colorado that have their own, and then like in states doing it. It's a lot to keep track of, and a lot to, again, like, well, which is it? Is it, is it the city level? Is it the state level? At the end of the day, it is going to take a little bit of time for some of that to kind of get, flushed out, right? At the end of the day, again, if you're going to just reduce risk and think proactively, you just want to start making sure you're just thinking about it, because something will probably happen, right? Even if a city is moving forward, maybe they can't go forward with a full policy, but they're going to want to try to do something, right? So I would not just sort of sit back and relax and wait for it to see what happens in the courts. I would start thinking about, and just start having a little plan in place, and start, strategically thinking about, so you are ready. And look, at the end of the day, and that's, I'm glad you asked that, actually, Caroline, because I want to make sure that I don't want this to sound like a bad thing. Because while there can be some things to work through, this type of policy can really ultimately, again, you just have to do it maybe a little quicker than you would do it on your own, but it can really help you reduce operating expenses. It can create a better building for your business. There's a lot of positive advantages that come from it on the other side. So just want to make sure, again, it's not all bad. There's a lot of good that comes with this. Don't be scared of it.
I think I think in areas where there's tension between state leadership and local, continue to consider economic development initiatives at the local level. Like, there may be, even if it is not described as a building performance standard per se, there may be an interest in economic development, trying to attract business to that city or county. Look at those things, and then we're paying a lot of attention to what pressure is going to be on brands. We work with so many multi-unit franchisees. If there's brand pressure, then if the brand is needing to satisfy either federal regulators or just investor demand, they're going to be interested in being able to satisfy and meet those demands, regardless of what a state is saying. And from a purely business perspective, if there are risks to my business, it is my job to pay attention to those risks. And I'm not interested in being told not to pay attention to those risks. That is my personal position on being told to kind of look away from some of these concerns. But it is a true business consideration and a fiduciary consideration as well. So thanks. That's a great question. And it's important because we're going to see those sorts of tensions emerging throughout the United States.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. 100% tracking with everything you just said. Again, our purpose in showing the map, again, is just to make sure that you understand that again, this is a thing. It's happening, it's growing, and it may or may not affect you directly. But either way, because of all the other market drivers, like thinking about this, thinking about, what you can do, maybe next steps for your brand management, to be in a better building, to help keep your staff happy, right? It all ties in. So, and it all leads to a lot of good things. But so what does all this have to do with the lease? So as everybody knows, the lease is a critical tool in the life of a real estate asset, right? So it sets the stage for how your business interacts with the building. So it's really important that as much as you can, that you use that tool, right? Use that lease to help mitigate risk. So, as an example, like any financial risk of policy noncompliance, or reputational risk that, if your building doesn't, reflect the goals of your brand, you want to make sure that you're able to do the things you need to do in that building to make sure that, that it does align with your brand, that if you're saying that you're this, but your building doesn't reflect that, like that's not good for your brand. And again, as we were just talking about, like there could be some financial risk. So you want to protect yourself in the lease. But again, let's think about it positively. Where there's risk, there's opportunity, right? I can't stress this enough. This is opportunity to drive operational savings in your business. It's opportunity to attract new staff, attract new customers, to represent your brand associated with excellence, right? Like
And I think it's a relationship builder with lessors, because your
yeah,
building owner and your tenant,
yeah,
it's a great collaborative opportunity, for
that's
the
a
benefit
great
of
point.
both.
That's an absolutely a great point. So let's make sure I didn't skip. Okay, let's look into this a little bit deeper here. So we're calling this a high performance lease, but there's different terminologies. It can be known as an energy aligned or a green lease. But the whole idea here is just, Caroline, you teed this up perfectly. It's about creating collaborative agreements between owners and tenants. So, the leasing process can, most of the time be a little adversarial. It's like, it's about my things. But one of the key components of a high performance lease is to work together and try to create this agreement between landlord and tenant to where there's like even a win-win outcome, right? Think about that. The idea here is, how can you more equitably align costs and benefits of efficiency? Because, you may be hesitant to invest in a high efficiency HVAC if you don't own the building, right? You're like, I got several years on my lease, but I don't own this asset. Why am I going to spend that money? Or if you own the building, the landlord, you're like, why would I want to invest in this building? Because the tenant gets all the savings. So like this is called the split incentive. And which is one of the reasons why this whole concept was created. And this is why a green or a high performance lease is so important, because the split incentive is a very common problem. And in this scenario, nothing ever gets done. So that's why thinking about this a little bit and thinking about what opportunities are, like, hey, how can hey landlord or hey tenant, like, can we work together so we can, figure out what makes sense. So like maybe and we'll talk about some win-win outcomes a little bit, but just think about like maybe how you can do it to where you can understand those and be able to achieve those savings, and again make your building better, while at the same time, not expecting your landlord just to pay for everything. How can you sort of divide it up for whatever makes sense for your particular situation? So there's a lot of different ways you can work on making it equitable for both parties, but it's just that, but think about that concept of just being able to have those conversations between tenant and landlord. So again, like the whole idea is to eliminate the split incentive problem, reduce your utility bills. Like we have just kind of a statistic here, thinking about like if you could save 51 cents per square foot, like that would be a thing. Be happy to do that. Increase comfort and productivity of staff, like that's huge. And not to mention, like if you have any ESG goals and targets of your own companies or anybody that's asking you, to see any progress you're making here. And then again, all of that helps you mitigate the risk. All right, so let's talk about the key parameters of a high performance or green lease. Like, it's like some of you may be thinking, like, what are you even talking about here? I mean, the idea is some of the general concepts are, to outline the priorities of both parties, right? And really address and prioritize any specific environmental health, wellness. Like, again, if you have very specific things that are important to your business, you want to make sure related to sustainability that it's outlined in your lease. Establishes a sustainability point of contact. This is the simplest thing, but I can't stress enough how important it is, because, if you're trying to get something done and you need to talk to someone, like, how do you know, like, whoever your main contact is might not be the person for your landlord that can get that done. But if you have an energy contact or a sustainability contact specifically, that you could go directly to them to talk about, hey, our building really needs X, but we'd like to do X. Can we talk about how we can get this done together? Right. So it's just and for same with your side, if the landlord has a contact from your side, like, who's the right person? If the landlord wants to do something, who's the right person for them to talk to? So it's a small thing, but it carries a lot of weight, and it just simplifies things so much down the road. And then, of course, we want to define how the building and the tenant space in particular will operate, and the ability to report progress, which is big. We're going to dig into data a little bit in just a second here.
And just previewing a little, Marla, we
Yeah.
have IMT has some sample lease clauses. There's tools we can look up if anyone is interested. If you need to kind of see some specific examples, those tools are available on the website. If you just want to read some text, see what this looks like.
Yes, absolutely. We've got resources, and we'll actually give you some links to be able to look at that. Because I do think that's very true. Having some sample lease language is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can take it and customize it, for your own business. I mean, the other thing I do want to mention, like, as a retailer, like, you may have landlords you work with, and you just may even use like their paper, but you should at least go to the table with some specific things that that you want to have in your space in order to meet specific ESG goals or any requirements that your business is seeing. You'll probably have to negotiate, but that's what it is. It's a negotiation. But and again, trying to get to a win-win outcome. And even if it doesn't hit 100%, again, if you have multiple locations, even if you can't get every single landlord to negotiate with it, like, at least if you try, at least you can get it in most. We find most landlords are actually, they have the same kind of market drivers on their side, right? It's all the same. So a lot of them are trying to do the same things. So it's like when you find,
and we have an interesting point raised in the chat that
yes.
one technique is to sprinkle this kind of language throughout the lease, because if it is a standalone clause, if the lessor is not interested, they will axe it. And I was going to say, if we're using landlord forms, so I've seen the other scenario where the landlord actually is incorporating, they're interested in pursuing a LEED certification or similar, but they include clauses putting a lot of responsibility on tenant, and there's no discussion of cost, either for a tenant to report certain things or even to make sort of unspecified adjustments in order to help the lessor obtain the certification. So as we're reading leases, make sure you're reading through the form top to bottom, so that you can negotiate these performance clauses as well as other clauses that you're more used to negotiating. Thank you for raising that point in the chat.
It's an excellent point. And I've always sort of stood by that as well. I've been working on green leasing for a long time in different capacities. And back when I was working with a landlord, we did that debate. Like, do we put it throughout? Do we have just a separate? And we integrated it throughout. And it's not to try to hide anything. It's not, but it's just because you want to be able to go through and have those conversations, versus if it's just one paper, like, how easy it is to not even look at it, like, oh, that's something different, we don't need it, right? And it gets thrown out. Yeah, that's an excellent point, and I agree 100%. Just want to give you a little case study. This is just an example of a company. So H&M, everybody's probably aware of H&M. So they had a great story, great collaboration with the landlord and utilities on some energy retrofits. So, I mean, they have a really large commitment to sustainability. They're participating in all these different, energy productivity and renewable energy commitments that they're doing. But the goal, I mean, the whole point here is they have some initiatives that were important to their business. So they, their goal was to double their energy productivity and to power its global operations with renewable energy by 2030. So big goal, right? So again, obviously, if they're leasing spaces, how in the world would they be able to do that without having, conversations with the landlord? So through landlord-tenant collaboration, they were able to be very successful. They have improved their store energy efficiency, and because the landlord was perfectly willing to work with them, and together they were able to go to the utilities and get incentive dollars to help retrofit the HVAC rooftop units. So they got utility rebates for about 40% of the retrofit projects, and now they're saving approximately $2,500 per store annually. So again, big initiative. It's kind of like, oh my gosh, and you can imagine them thinking like, oh, how are we going to do this? Having some great conversations with landlords, pulling in utilities, being able to put all the pieces together and take advantage of those incentives and save a pretty significant amount of money on top of it. So I think this is a great example of, and again, maybe it's extreme, maybe you don't have that large of a goal, but it just sort of shows you, like, again, if you're able to have those conversations, you can get things done.
And I want to stress that the utility incentive piece, that is a place we are recommending folks start to look for fast savings. You do not have to be an enormous name like H&M. Here in Georgia, where I'm located, Georgia Power has a small commercial direct install program, which at PropertyWorks in our home office, we took advantage of this, where they came and evaluated all of our lighting, replaced our lighting. We paid a fraction of the cost, and Georgia Power covered the rest to lower our utility bills, basically. And a number of utility providers, especially if they're publicly traded, and they also are getting pressure, they're getting investor pressure or customer pressure, are offering more and more of these programs because it helps them as well to be able to say, this is what we're doing. And then they can take, like, if our utility costs go down, that's also a reduced emissions impact that we can speak about. And also our utility provider can say they helped us to reduce our overall emissions related footprint, as we're just purchasing energy off the grid, not whether it's renewable or fossil fuel generated. We aren't specifying this is our, just our company. But we've done some research at PropertyWorks for local utility incentives, and we are seeing a lot of these coast to coast in the US. So that is a great place to start. See if you can get something, see if you can get some improvement without having to invest much upfront.
Absolutely, 100%. And a point that I want to stress to everybody is, if you are doing any kind of equipment work in your space, be it water, HVAC, lighting, like, always ask your vendor for to price out your like for like option, but also price out a high efficiency option, and if there are any incentives. And I'm not trying to we love our vendors. I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus. It's just the nature of the beast, right? They are an industry, like they've got lots of equipment, and it's easy for them just to replace like for like, and they keep moving. It's all good. But, and sometimes you might have somebody, if they really know that this is something you're focused on, like maybe they'll bring it up, but in general, they're not going to bring it up. And the reason that you should always ask, the high efficiency option that comes up, you know what, it could be that it's way too expensive. It's like the differential between the two, like there's not a good ROI, so you don't do it. But at least you had the chance to look at that and make that evaluation before making your decision, right? Knowledge is power. Because, and the reason I stress it is because I've seen it over and over and over, especially with these utility incentives. If you're not able to look at that, a lot of times high efficiency equipment is the stuff that that incentive money goes towards. And you could literally spend more money for a like system replacement than you would had you gone with the high efficiency with the incentive, and money gets left on the table. And you know, nobody wants that. So if you just always make sure you ask for that option, so you have all the options on the table, and then you can make an educated decision about, you know, what makes the most sense for your business. But we don't want money left on the table. We want as much efficiency as you can possibly get for your budgeted dollar. Okay. So we're going to jump in here to like, okay, it's like, all right, we've got all the background. Where do we start? And I know in the interest of time, I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly, but there are two pieces to the puzzle here. And oh gosh, sorry about that. There. What happens when your hand touches the mouse? There are two pieces to the puzzle here, and we're talking about leases today. But the very first step is a critical one that ultimately does tie back to the lease, and that is tracking your utility data. So we're going to dive into this in just a minute. And I don't mean just cost, I mean also your usage, because all of this that we're talking about, all these market drivers, like that data number, that utility usage number is the key to all of this. So there's tracking your utility data, and then looking at your current lease form or your current leasing practices, just to see like, hey, is there anything that we should be looking at here? All right, so let's quickly talk about data. So again, I'm talking about consumption. Cost is great, is important, super important. And I would venture to say you're all tracking your utility cost, but you may not be tracking your usage. You know, this is an old adage, you hear it all the time, but you can't manage what you don't measure. So that's why the energy usage is the key to high performance building. So like I found a lot of times, you know, if you're tracking your utility cost and you're meeting a budget, you're good, right? But the problem is you have no idea if your building is efficient or not. So understanding if the level of efficiency for your building helps you know if you have room for savings. Like, do you have room for improvement? Are there savings opportunities here? Also, while mitigating any risk of data performance disclosure requirements. So Energy Star Portfolio Manager, maybe some of you have heard of this tool, but this is a no-cost tool. Okay, this is the tool from the US EPA. It's no cost. They have all kinds of training. It's very user-friendly. But this, I've been a fan of this tool since the beginning of time. It tells you so much information that's of great value. And the other thing I just want to, you know, make sure that it's clear, because we have it listed on the slide here. Energy is number one. Like, you want to make sure your energy data gets in there, but it also does track water and waste data, which is nice because you have all your data in one place. And if any, it's a platform that all the governments are using for the policy or for any benchmarking requirements. It's easy. Like, again, if you have an owner or somebody that's asking you to, an investor, somebody's asking you to share data, super simple again, and it's all free to use this tool. So this step is a risk mitigator, right? So this is why we're going to talk about it for just a second here. And I just want to make sure that understanding, like, there's two pieces of the puzzle. So you put in a little bit of building information, and then you put in 12 months of your energy usage, right? So that would be electricity and natural gas if you have it, or any other energy sources. And by putting in those two halves of information, you get a score from 1 to 100. And like, kind of think about this as almost like a miles per gallon sort of equivalent, you know, like you know, when you go to a car lot to buy a new car, like you may not necessarily buy the hybrid, but you know, when it says that there's a 48 miles per gallon, you're like, man, that's efficient. You know, that's high compared to, you know, the other big, huge Escalade or whatever, which is, you know, what, 22 or something like that. So you immediately know what that means. And that's what this score does, this score from 1 to 100 does for building types. The higher the number, the better. From a score from 75 to 100 is the target zone for efficiency. And it's also an opportunity for Energy Star certification, right? The Energy Star brand is one of the most recognized brands in the country. So if you have an Energy Star certification, nice clean sticker on your door when your customers walk through, it's a very positive indicator for your brand. So that's the high level, and that's the target zone. 50 is average, makes sense, pretty easy. And then from anything that's below average, you may have to do some investing in there. So it's kind of like that bottom end is like, oh, we're going to need to probably do a little bit of investing to sort of work our way up the scale. Or if you're kind of in the middle, there's probably a lot of low-hanging fruit, maybe some just retuning that you can do, again, just to continually get your score moving up the trajectory. One last thing about these scores, if you're a company that has multiple locations, it's nice to see the scores of each of your buildings in your portfolio. Because if you've got like 3 that are above 75 and you've got one that's a 50 and one that's a 20, you're going to be able to like prioritize that 20, prioritize some capital there, right? As opposed to just sort of thinking that they're all equal. Like that's where you've got some opportunity for savings and a little bit of risk that you want to mitigate.
And it's something that we're looking at for, we use it ourselves at PropertyWorks, and then looking for our clients, because as someone's pointed out in the chat, that the score may not be as useful if it may not be available if you're only reporting on a portion of an entire building footprint. But it continues to be a useful place to just house data and get a visual of how your usage is fluctuating and how your costs are fluctuating along with it. So we can offer support to clients in just the manual work of loading data in, because you do have to load your 12 months of data. There was a way to sign in to kind of automate with your utility provider, and I think we did go ahead and do that on our electricity side. But for water, continuing to enter from basically spreadsheets, our operations and management tools that we're using to actually run the building for business purposes. But you can put more than one location. You can put multiple into your Energy Star portfolio manager. So it's useful if you've got a regional footprint, you're operating in a lot of spaces. And for us, it's a way to manage and watch how we're performing month over month. And then we'll be able to look at that year over year. And we're anticipating needing to report for supply chain purposes, as we're a vendor in a supply chain. For clients who ask, how can we speak to the usage in our own space and how we're tracking? And if we're all speaking the language of Energy Star portfolio manager, that just helps make it a little bit easier. And it is also, we have evaluated a number of tools on the market, and so far everything from our perspective seems to be extremely expensive. So this is the one we found that was budget friendly as well.
Yeah, it's definitely the go-to standard for the industry. And even if you do have like a much fancier system, they're going to want to feed the data into Portfolio Manager. Like ultimately, you want it in Portfolio Manager because again, that's the place where again you can share, you can be compliant. Like it's all roads and utility data lead to Portfolio Manager. And that's a really, really great point about even if you're in a multi-tenant situation or like a strip mall or something, you may not be able to get that certification, but you could still, track your space and still get a score to track your space. And there's a couple of quirky things based on, like, again, if you're a very specialized use type, but there's many building use types in there that are available. So I think most of you find it to be a really helpful tool. So, all right, so maintaining, there we go. So once you get your data in there, it's very easy to keep it maintained. Like it just takes a little bit to get everything in, and then you're good. And then you just want to make sure that either monthly or quarterly, however it makes sense. And to Caroline's point, check with your local utilities. They may be able to drop in to automatically feed in your utility data, which is amazing. But otherwise, if you do it and make it part of the routine, or have your accounting folks, whoever's touching the invoices, make it a part of the ongoing routine of just entering that number in. It's very easy to keep up with. And then that, again, like I said, it helps you be prepared for a better capital planning strategy, any reporting requirements that come from partners, investors, compliance, all of those things that we talked about as a risk mitigator. You're ready to go for all those things. And then the second part of the strategy is to look at your current lease or your current lease process. So do you currently have a standard form that has any requirements, from your side, that you maybe you have a full lease form, or you have a standard? So just take a look at that to see, like, are there a couple of things maybe you might want to look at as a starting point to take to your landlord. And just remember too, this you can start with new leases. It's easier to start with new leases, but it can also apply to renewals. If you're in a BPS jurisdiction, you probably want to, make sure that your renewal has some language in there that's very clear on who's responsible for what. And then the questions like, well, where do I start? What's the best place to start, on these sort of high performance lease clauses? So I've got a few here that, are just easy ones that pretty much, anybody can start with. Now, again, you want to make sure you're starting with what works for your business, but these are kind of the top ones that I want to make sure that we talk about. When you're first getting into a new building or a new space, you want to make sure your fit out of your space is efficient as possible during that time. So I also highly recommend that you have a set of efficiency standards for your fit outs. If you don't have that already, many of you probably do. You may even want to have your someone, a consultant, or your teams or yourself review it to make sure it's got all the things it needs to make sure that this one time when there's a possible TI allowance, when you're spending money, like, get as much as you can related to efficiency then while you're doing it. It's the most economical you can to do it while you're building out the space. The next one, sustainability contact. I already talked about it a little bit, right? It's so simple, but it helps facilitate any discussions along the way. Data transparency. So this whole data and tracking that we were just talking about in Portfolio Manager. So if you control the data in your space, you've got the meters, it's all, and if you've got it in Portfolio Manager, if your landlord asks for it, you're like, sure, here's read-only access. It's a push of a button and they can see it in Portfolio Manager. It's super easy. Or if the landlord says, we've got a BPS, I need you, or we have to report our scope 3 emissions, and you're our scope 3 emissions, and we need your data. You're like, sure, got it right here. It's in Portfolio Manager. Again, you just give that read-only access and you're good to go. It's very easily done. So this data transparency piece should actually be in the lease, right? That you're willing to provide it, the landlord is willing to provide it, whoever controls it is willing to share it with the party that does not control it, right? If you don't have control over utility data, you should have the right to ask for to know how efficient the building is. So like, ask the landlord to report to you on an annual basis what your Energy Star score is. That's a lease clause that we see a lot. So again, like I said, the bottom line is whoever controls that utility data should be willing to be transparent about it and share it with the other party, if asked, if needed, on a regular basis, that kind of thing. I want to talk about real quick this concept of win-win outcomes that we talked about at the very beginning. You may be like, yeah, that all sounds well and good, but like, how do you get win-win out of some of these things? So the sustainability point of contact, I mean, that's an easy one. Again, we talked about it already. I'm not going to keep going over it, but that is a win-win, right? Is if those parties, if needed, those contacts can have a conversation to help make sure that you can get done in your space what you need. Data transparency, like we were just talking about. So from the tenant side, if you control it, that you'll provide it to the landlord if they need it. Or if the landlord controls it, that they'll provide the Energy Star score to you as the tenant if you ask for it. So again, there's a give and take. The other thing is submetering of spaces. So many of you probably have your own individually metered or submetered spaces, but if you don't, you want to try to get the ability to submeter your space so you can make sure that you are managing the energy usage for your operations and for your business. So we always, say, a tenant, if that's a situation for you, then you may want to make sure that you are willing to pay for the submetering of that space, or you're at least willing to have that conversation like, hey, landlord, how can we work this out so we can be submetered? And then the landlord should give you the ability to submeter the space. Again, like right now, submetering generally isn't in the leases and it just isn't done. So, and it's a very important piece of the puzzle. All right, CapEx, energy efficiency CapEx. So when they're done, when there is a major investment that needs to happen for the efficiency of the asset. So on the tenant side, your reaction is probably to be like, no, we don't want to pay for any CapEx, but think about it, right? And you should be willing to pay for CapEx that you can see savings from over your lease term, right? And on the landlord side, they should be able to amortize and pass through costs, but they should also do it in a fair way. One of my favorites, and we have one of these, a sample lease clause in our reference guide, that the landlord will amortize 80% until it's paid off, and then so the tenant will see a little bit of savings from day one, and as soon as it's paid off, then you see significant savings. So these kind of, again, negotiations, and I know it depends on the term and what the ROI is and all that, but bringing those conversations to the table so you can get a win-win, it's the way to go. And then the last one here is just about, setting or accepting any energy targets and working together for a solution. So you as a tenant may say, I have this target that my company, think about the H&M scenario, right? They had this major goal. So putting that somehow in the lease, right? And being able to come to the landlord to work on it. Or vice versa, right? The landlord has a major target and you're like, well, I don't really care about this target, but because it's important to the landlord and it will help me ultimately as well, because it'll help me save money. Okay, I'll accept it. So that's the give and take. The other thing I wanted to say was sometimes on the capital investment, and I missed this point, on the capital investment side, you might be able to work with the landlord like, hey, landlord, if you will pay for this capital investment for the building, because it's a definite building improvement, we'll extend our lease term, or we'll do an early renewal. Like those are the kind of, again, there's things you can do with your lease that are wins for the landlord that might motivate them to go ahead and make that investment. All right, I know we are getting so close to time and I've only just got a couple things. Caroline, was there anything else on this that you wanted to?
Not on this, it was more just, I want to make sure we've got just a couple of questions and also some really excellent points in the chat around, like the chat is as good a resource as the presentation for some links to incentives, looking for opportunities for capturing aggregate data, because thinking about multiple meters, if you're dealing with 300 meters, that is a lot, and ways to pursue aggregate data. And then we've got a couple questions in the chat that I think are interesting. So if you want to speak to Green Lease leaders real briefly, and then we can finish up with the chat, the Q&A questions and any other questions.
That's perfect. For those of you who have already, maybe you're already on this journey and you've already done some greening of your lease, just want to make sure you know about the Green Lease Leaders program, because it gives you an opportunity to get recognition for that. It's a program that IMT runs with the Department of Energy, And we would love to have you take a look at this. We've got all kinds of resources. So you can go to greenleaseleaders.com, and our portal opens on October 2nd. We're also going to provide a couple of other lease links to resources. So you've got plenty of things that can help give you good guidance. And then, yes, let's go. What other questions do we have in the couple of minutes we've got?
So we had one question about multifamily, which I don't know about. What are some solutions for multifamily where these leases turn over pretty readily?
Yes, that's it's a great question, because multifamily is a little bit more of a challenge, but we're really seeing landlords start to be innovative on how they're doing this. And one thing that they're doing is trying to make sure that every time a unit turns, that they're able to get in there and really make some upgrades, or make some any kind of changes for efficiency that can be made, and health and wellness as well. And then some of the things that are going into the leases with the residents, and with the resident, it's not, it's not a pass-through situation, right? Although if your market rate, affordable is a little bit different, and affordable, really, incentives and green financing are the solutions for affordable. But on market rate, if you've done a lot of really nice efficiency upgrades, and your tenants are going to save significantly in their utility cost for their units, then you can increase a little bit on the rent to help recoup that back. And I think that that's what landlords are looking to do. They're doing it in a fair way to make sure that with the ability to draw those savings, then the residents, it comes out in the wash, right? The rent's a little bit higher, but they're saving significantly on the energy cost. And the other thing around health and wellness is, it's a good idea not to just let the residents, do things like, high VOCs, don't use high VOC paint, don't, there's some rules that you can do to help make sure the indoor air quality stays well, and that there's recycling opportunities. There's a lot of different things sort of going in the resident side, and just and there's also a lot of resident engagement opportunities even outside of the lease to help, as opposed to requiring them to have their temperature set at a certain level. You wouldn't do that, but you could do an engagement program on top of what's in the lease to help educate them on things they can do.
Well, I think we have reached our time. Are there any other questions? I am going to throw IMT's website into the chat, so that if you want to look up any of the resources, you can just click on it and grab that. And we're here at PropertyWorks to also answer questions and see how we can support clients that are digging into this, and want to do it as efficiently and low cost as possible. Really appreciative of everybody's time and great questions. I did see one about the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act. That is not something I have focused on in terms of available incentives. I know there's guidance available online, and I also acknowledge that because a lot of it is tax incentives, it is a bit thorny to get through, but I cannot speak with expertise on that point. Any other last thoughts, questions? Otherwise, we will conclude, and we'll